Grazie mille, professore. Riprendiamo le domande alla fine come nella prima parte della mattinata e dopo questa escursione, questo percorso sulla filosofia della scienza, parliamo di qualcosa di un pochino più, non di un pochino, ma qualcosa che ci permetterà di entrare un po' più nella praticità. Questo viene proprio chiamata così da loro stessi, Theoretical Practical Lecture Performance. Lo facciamo con il professor Weihe, non ce la farò mai, scusate, e l'attore Vargas Torres, che invito a raggiungerci. Dobbiamo fare un piccolo, ci concederete un paio di minuti, dobbiamo fare forse spostare qualcosa sulla scena.
A little bit of preparation because it's semi-theater. I would like to thank the Fondazione John Eccles for their kind invitation and giving us the opportunity to experiment with a performative format when talking about body language in the performing arts. Is this audible? Is it good, clear? Thank you. We will be looking at the theatre and dance. But before that, let me give you a theoretical frame in which we can locate our practical investigations, starting with the theatre. The common denominator of all theatrical attempts, of all theoretical attempts to define theatrical performance, is the physical co-presence of actors and spectators. Theatre is the hic et nunc, the here and now, of actors and spectators sharing the same space and time. Once this basic situation is given, the art of theatre is for the actors to communicate with the audience. By communication, I mean the transfer of information by different channels and means. If we view the theatre as a communication system, with a sender on the one hand and a receiver on the other hand, then the actors are in the position of the sender and the spectators in the position of the receiver. Now, where to locate non-verbal communication and body language in this system? We can fit these terms into a simple communication model operating with three distinctions. We draw a first distinction between verbal and non-verbal communication. I'm going to use a traditional blackboard for this. Verbal and non-verbal. Here we would have this position of the sender, and I said that could be equivalent to the actor in this model. We can draw a second distinction on the level of non-verbal communication between the paraverbal and body language. There's the word body language. So here we have a second distinction, paraverbal and this word body language. Body language. Hoping that that is legible at the back. Paraverbal refers to the use of the voice, volume, vocal pitch, speaking pace, rhythm, and vocalization, such as coughing, laughter, yawning, sneezing, all those sounds that come with the speech. We can draw, before I say anything about body language, we can draw a third distinction on the level of body language between appearance and physical Okay, so it's the difference between, the distinction between appearance and all physical movement. Appearance refers to what we would call first impression, static information, clothing, hair, jewelry, tattoos, facial traits, and smells, as well as all these visual impressions, perfume, sweat, all these elements are part of the appearance of a person. All the physical activity refers to perceptible movements. Eye contact, facial expression, which is moving all the time, gestures, change of posture, sequence of movements in space in relation to the receiver, and touch behavior. And we can draw the receiving end at this side, and we said that would be equivalent to the spectators or audience, if you want to use, and all these channels are means of communication, of information between the sender and the receiver, in this case, actors and audience. So this is a very simple way of structuring this notion of non-verbal, and it is interesting to see that research has shown that non-verbal communication is dominant in human interaction. I think that's probably been mentioned many times this morning, but communication takes its measure from the human body. The majority of information we are receiving from the other is determined by signals that the body sends out communicatively. We call it body language. One study I read proposes exact percentages. 93% of information is transmitted non-verbally, 38% paraverbally, and 55% by body language. Only 77% of information is transmitted verbally. Why are the non-verbal signs so important? Because physical activity, particularly facial expression, tells us how the other person feels. In written communication, we add emois to indicate our mood. To some extent, the pictograms can replace the absence of body language when we receive a text message or an email. Of course, I can do a nice little smiley for you. Okay. So, a smiley telling the receiver of this message that the writer is in a good mood. For us, working at the Academia Dimitri, a school focusing on physical theatre, it is obviously crucial to be aware of this dominance of body language, which can be considered the primary means of theatrical communication. Now, in the history of theatre, this point, which seems so obvious to us, has either been ignored completely, not given the necessary consideration, or actively suppressed. The reason being that the institutionalized theatre concentrated on the text, the drama as a literary product. The word theatre has effectively been equivalent to staging a drama, staging a play. In other words, it was seen as an extension of literature and not as an art form in its own right. Let me give you a couple of historical examples for this. In the Poetics, discussing Greek tragedy, Aristotle claims that actors are not relevant in order to achieve the full effect of tragedy. According to the philosopher, reading the text and imagining the action are just as good as watching a performance. Aristotle's extreme position promoting incorporality was followed by the Church Fathers' hostility towards the body, stopping the development of an institutionalized theatre for many centuries. They viewed acting as a form of prostitution, and the Greek and Roman use of masks was considered sacrilegious because it covered the human face created in the image of God. In 17th century France, actors performed in a rhetorical style in which gestures served to enforce or illustrate the meaning of the text. The eloquence of the body was a function of oratory. At the same time, in the 17th century, the Commedia dell'arte, already before that, Commedia dell'arte in Italy brought a strong physical dimension to the theatre, emphasizing body language. Yet, at the end of the 18th century, institutionalized theatre had successfully suppressed the commedia's comic, grotesque style of acting, a style based on the practical abilities of the actor. Dell'arte, commedia dell'arte, refers to the actor's skill, agility, and craftsmanship. Arte is not the art of comedy. Yet in the age of enlightenment, the word and rationality counted. The expressive, often sexually explicit body language of Arlecchino and company was seen as unbefitting the civilized citizen. With naturalism at the end of the 19th century, a veristic acting style prevailed, a style as close as possible to natural behavior in which body language is not perceived as theatrical in a pejorative sense. We see this style in Konstantin Stanislavski's productions of plays by Anton Chekhov, and Stanislavski's method later became famous as method acting for film actors in Hollywood. A consistent theme in 20th century theatre is the exploration of the body of the actor as a medium of physical expression, often referring back to the Commedia dell'arte and incorporating impulses and influences from Eastern theatre traditions and practices. These brief remarks should suffice to show that body language can serve as a parameter when analyzing the characteristics of acting styles, by looking at the relationship between verbal communication as prescribed by the drama and non-verbal communication as displayed in performance. Even in performing a drama, in literary theatre, if I may call it that, paraverbal expression is left to the actor, while dramatists can indicate body language to a certain extent by using stage directions. Arguably, the most famous scene in the history of drama which addresses body language is the play within the play in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Prince Hamlet instructs actors to perform a scene in front of his uncle Claudius in which the sleeping Duke Gonzago is killed by pouring poison into his ear. This is the way in which Prince Hamlet believes his father, the King of Denmark, was murdered by Claudius. Hamlet instructs the players to perform in a naturalistic manner. I quote, "Suit the action to the word to the action." In other words, verbal information and physical activity should be connected to intensify the meaning of the scene. During the performance of the scene, Hamlet closely observes Claudius's reactions. Indeed, when the poison is applied, Claudius reacts very strongly, gets up and calls off the show. "Give me some light, away!" But it's a physical reaction. And Hamlet interprets this reaction as Claudius's non-verbal, if you like, confession to have committed the crime of poisoning the king in the way it was shown in the play, in the piece. Now, Hamlet sees it as his obligation to take revenge on his uncle. theatre has served as a lie detector. Ah, there you are. Raoul. Yes, you're back. I present to you Wilson Raul Vargas Torres. Is a former student of Academia Dimitri. And I think from our first impression of his appearance, we instantly infer basic information regarding gender, age, ethnic and cultural background, and to a lesser extent professional occupation, social political bias, and financial status.
Can I give you a hug?
Stop there. Don't come any closer. This is Corona, 1.5 Corona distance.
I have my mask.
Okay, put it on. That's okay now. So, actually, strictly speaking, we call it Corona mask. It's not a mask, really. It is a mouth and nose protection. Yet covering the mouth cancels out the possibility of seeing a smile. And smiling is a fundamental signal in any encounter. On a smaller face, with hair hanging down from the forehead, the mouth protection only leaves the eyes free and the person is unrecognizable. In addition to that, keeping social distance, the 1.5 meters I quoted, rules out the handshake, hugs, embraces, any touching. The corona pandemic thereby has produced a lot of insecurity among children in a phase in which they normally would be acquiring the body language game, to call it that, of interpersonal encounter. The simple idea of covering the head with a stocking was used by the theatre reformer and teacher Jacques Copeau in his acting school École du Vieux Colombier in Paris, attached to his theatre of the same name. The school was founded in 1920 and only lasted 4 years until 1924. Now, Copeau renewed the interest in pantomime, the Greek word literally meaning imitating everything, a purely physical form of theatre renouncing the spoken word. The stocking was a pedagogic device for acting students to neutralize the main area of expression, the face, and shift the emotional expression away from the face so the whole body would learn to speak. Copeau called his technique expression corporelle et plastique.
Avete capito?
This device was later developed.
Wait, I missed something.
This device was later adopted and developed by the theatre pedagogue Jacques Lecoq in Paris and the Italian mask maker Amleto Sartori. They created the so-called neutral mask for the Lecoq school, where it became a very important tool in actors training. The neutral mask, similar to this stocking experiment, makes the use of the face as a means of expression impossible. The idea is that the body takes over this function instead, thereby affecting the neutrality of the mask and giving it a certain expression, if only in the eye of the beholder. An equally important teaching device for physical expression at the Lecoq School, as well as at the Accademia Dimitri, are the Commedia dell'arte masks. The distinct masks of the Commedia represent clearly defined social types. These were already fully established when the Commedia first emerged as a form of market theatre in the middle of the 16th century. Putting on a mask is equivalent to adopting a particular mode of moving and speaking. The Arlecchino mask, with animal, in fact monkey traits, represents a specific body language encoded in many drawings and descriptions. Again, the silence of the mask and the exclusion of facial expression forces the expression into the body and movement. The grotesque comic style contained in the Arlecchino mask is characterized by exaggerated body movement. Acrobatic and dance interludes are part of Arlecchino's repertoire. In 1913, the young dancer Marie Wiegmann, better known as Mary Wiegmann, attended the summer school of the dance pedagogue Rudolf von Laban here on Monte Verita, 110 years ago. Laban's intention was to deconstruct the rigorously coded style of classical ballet and develop a new form of stage dance allowing freer movements. Returning to Germany, Wiegmann created her own form of Ausdruckstanz, Neuer Tanz, expressive dance, and in 1920 founded her own dance school in Dresden. In her own words, Wiegmann wanted to, I quote, to let one's person speak through the body. In dance, Wiegmann communicates things non-verbally, which she cannot communicate verbally. Pina Bausch, the famous founder of the Tanztheater Wuppertal, expresses a similar thought in the 1970s. I quote, "Wenn ich es sagen könnte, müsste ich es nicht tanzen. If I could say it, I would not have to dance it." Influenced by the new dance developed in Germany by Mary Wiegmann, Valeska Gerd and others, a new type of dance was created in Japan after World War II by Tatsumi Hijikata and Katsuo Ono, named Ankoku Buto, or Dance of Darkness. In 1968, Tatsumi Hijikata performed his piece entitled The Japanese Tatsumi Hijaka, The Rebellion of the Body. Hijaka's teacher, Soko Meiya, had studied at Wiegmann's school in Dresden from 1931 to 1933. On the one hand, Buto revolted against the strict codification of movement in classical Japanese dance. On the other hand, against the Americanization of Japanese culture and the performing arts, especially by musicals. But most significantly, Buto expresses the traumas of the body in 20th century. The emblematic image it draws from is ash-covered bodies slowly emerging like ghosts from the devastated city of Hiroshima after the explosion of the atomic bomb. Hijikata says Buto is, I quote, the cadaver that wants to rise at any cost with all passion. Cadaver, which wants a corpse that wants to rise against the death. The revolutionary body language of Bhutan is based on the renewed definition of the body under the aspect of death. The bone-white, made-up Bhutto bodies, totally made up with white makeup, are reminiscent of dancing skeletons. There are no words to express the horror of the world on the level of Hiroshima. It has left us speechless. Only the body can be the medium to express our sensations, facing the violence and brutality of the human being, a post-mortem body rising to express its agony. In retrospect, the rebellion of the body was not only Tatsumi Hijikata's, it was a danced manifesto. We can interpret the grotesque deformations of the dance of darkness as a revolt against the functionalization of the body in contemporary society. A body enslaved into immobility by continuous hyperactive attention-getting from the media. In the bombardment with noise and images in the digital world, we no longer hear the voice of our body. And as our attention is permanently drawn away from it, we communicate less and less internally with our own body. Instead of extending and refining our body language in a continuous learning process and getting more and more proficient, we are in fact unlearning it. Raoul, at the beginning of our talk,
Would you mind if I leave? Why? No?
it's okay. We just I want to get back to the beginning of our talk when we said that the physical co-presence of actors and spectators is the sine qua non of theatre. This confrontation constitutes the theatre.
Yeah, that's what's her name? Erika Fischer, no?
Yes, 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 exactly.
It's her definition
Of the theatre. So, according to that, if you and I are actors, physically present, and there is an audience physically present, this situation can be called theatre, using verbal and non-verbal communication.
I agree.
Okay?
Yeah.
But what about physical presence of players and spectators in the real theatre today?
Smear.
That's a very nice. I think it's not anymore so obvious, especially with the pandemic. I think the pandemic prevent the spectators to go to the theater physically.
Yeah.
And I would say that it can
Yes,
do
exactly.
something.
Exactly, that's the spectators. And what about the actors? The colonialization of everyday life by personal, verbal, and non-verbal communication devices has made the agony of the real, the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard diagnosed in the 1980s, palpable. Images of the body are displacing the real body. The agony of the real gives way to a virtual reality.
Wait. I'm trying to formulate it.
Yes? You want to comment?
I think I oso a dire, I dare to say that che ci vuole trovare una nuova definizione del teatro. We need to find a new definition of theater, especially because it is not anymore the co-presence. Now it's about, it's not the physical co-present, it's about the physical co-absence of the actors and the spectators.
You name it. But that would mean...
I can say it in Italian.
No, I think it's clear. The co-absence, you're stressing co-presence and saying it's co-absence. But that, of course, would mean the end of the theatre.
Yeah, sarebbe la fine del teatro.
I think the future of the theatre will depend on maintaining the dominance of live, non-verbal communication and body language over verbal and particularly visual communication via the electronic media. And because of this, the theatre needs acting schools training physical expression. And the society needs the theatre to demonstrate and preserve an elaborate body language. The body displacing digital society, I'm trying to translate Körperverdrängend, but I couldn't find a better translation, needs a body emphasizing theatre, körperbetonendes Theater. By placing the human being as an undivided physical, spiritual, and emotional being at the center, theatre can serve to overcome the reduction of the human being to its cognitive and economic functions. Theatre can be the nucleus of resistance against alienation, not through political theses, but through the process of embodiment, as resistance against disembodiment.